Single dad returned a lost wallet to a billionaire. 7 days later, his life changed forever. Most people would have kept it. That is not a judgment. That is just the truth about the kind of morning it was. Grey and cold and running late. The kind of morning where a wallet on the ground feels less like someone else's problem and more like the universe offering a small correction to a long streak of difficult months. Most people would have picked it up, looked around once, and made a decision they would have justified to themselves before they reached the end of the block. He did not keep it. And 7 days later, nothing about his life looked the same. This is the story of what happened in between. Not the version where everything is simple and the good deed gets its immediate reward, but the real version. The one where doing the right thing first makes everything harder before it makes anything better, and where the man at the center of it never once asked for what was coming. His name was Daniel Carr, and the wallet was just the beginning. Daniel Carr was 36 years old and he was running late, which was not unusual, because running late had become the ambient condition of his life since his daughter Nora turned 5 and developed opinions about breakfast that were incompatible with the morning schedule he had built before those opinions existed. Nora was now 7. The opinions had not simplified. They had evolved. He was a single father in the specific way that single parenthood becomes a system. Not a crisis, not a tragedy, but a set of calibrated solutions built and rebuilt over 4 years until they fit the actual shape of the life, rather than the theoretical shape of a life that had not yet encountered its complications. He had a laminated schedule on the refrigerator, color-coded by day. He had a backup bag packed by the front door at all times, containing a change of clothes for Nora, a granola bar, a small first aid kit, and a library book because waiting rooms were a fact of life, and waiting rooms without a book were unnecessarily long. He had a network of 3 other parents from Nora's school who he could call at 6 in the morning without apology, as they could call him, because that was the arrangement, and arrangements only worked when everyone honored them in both directions. Nora had her father's dark eyes and her mother's gift for identifying the exact question that would take the longest to answer. She was in 2nd grade and she was currently reading at a 4th grade level, which her teacher had mentioned at the fall conference with a combination of pride and mild exhaustion that Daniel recognized as the expression of someone managing a child who asked more questions than the curriculum was designed to accommodate. He had said he understood completely. He had become her only parent 4 years ago in the way that some things become true. Not with a single dramatic moment, but with an accumulation of smaller ones. Until one day the structure of a life had changed entirely and the new structure was simply what was. He had taken a week to process it, and then he had found the apartment on Clement Street and enrolled Nora in the school 2 blocks away and built the laminated schedule and become, deliberately and without complaint, exactly what she needed. On this particular Tuesday morning in November, she had decided that the specific cereal she wanted was not the cereal that was in the cabinet, and the cereal that was in the cabinet was not acceptable. And the negotiation that followed had cost Daniel 11 minutes that he did not have, and had ended with Nora eating toast with peanut butter and the expression of someone who had accepted a peace treaty under protest and intended to revisit the terms at the earliest opportunity. He dropped her at school at 7:53, which was 7 minutes before the bell but also 7 minutes later than he preferred. And then he walked the 14 blocks to the office where he worked as a senior loan processor for a regional credit union. Walking because the parking was expensive and the walk helped him think, and also because he had not yet replaced the brake pads on his car and was managing the situation through avoidance, which he knew was not a permanent strategy. He had worked at the credit union for 9 years. He had started as a junior processor and become senior by the straightforward mechanism of being consistently better at the job than the other candidates and being willing to stay when the people above him left for other opportunities. The work was not glamorous, and it did not pay exceptionally well for the level of responsibility it involved, and it had none of the external markers that the people he had gone to college with used to measure professional progress. What it had was this: every day it put him in contact with the actual financial lives of actual people, and he was good enough at his job to see the difference between what the numbers said about a person and what the person's life actually was. That gap, the space between the score and the story, was where he spent most of his professional attention and most of his professional frustration. He had a specific memory of a woman who had come in seeking a home improvement loan for a roof repair her landlord had refused to make, creating a mold situation her daughter's pediatrician had flagged as a health concern. Her credit score was low, not because she was unreliable, but because she had been briefly unemployed 3 years prior following a workplace injury, and the gap had registered in the system as a risk flag the system had no mechanism to contextualize. He had processed her application correctly. It had been declined correctly by the system's standards. He had written a memo about it. He wrote a memo about most of them. He was on memo number 14. He had worked at the credit union for 9 years. He had started as a junior processor and become senior by the straightforward mechanism of being consistently better at the job than the other candidates and being willing to stay when the people above him left for other opportunities. The work was not glamorous, and it did not pay exceptionally well for the level of responsibility it involved, and it had none of the external markers that the people he had gone to college with used to measure professional progress. What it had was this. Every day it put him in contact with the actual financial lives of actual people. And he was good enough at his job to see the difference between what the numbers said about a person and what the person's life actually was. That gap, the space between the score and the story, was where he spent most of his professional attention and most of his professional frustration. He had a specific memory of a woman named Patricia who had come in 2 years ago seeking a home improvement loan for a roof repair her landlord had refused to make, which was creating a mold situation her daughter's pediatrician had flagged as a health concern. Patricia's credit score was low, not because she was unreliable, but because she had been briefly unemployed 3 years prior following a workplace injury. And the gap had registered in the system as a risk flag the system had no mechanism to contextualize. He had processed her application correctly. It had been declined correctly by the system's standards. He had written a memo about Patricia. He had written a memo about the landscaping operator whose 11 years of consistent self-employment income did not present in the format the automated systems were designed to read. He had written a memo about the couple in their 60s who had been paying rent on time for 30 years and who could not qualify for a mortgage that would have cost less per month than what they were paying because the formula weighted a history of renting as evidence of inability rather than as evidence of a system that had not previously offered them a door. He was on memo 14. The review committee had acted on 11 of them. He walked the 14 blocks thinking about memo 15. He found the wallet on the corner of Merchant and 6th. It was a slim leather billfold, dark brown, lying open on the wet sidewalk as if it had been dropped in a hurry. He almost walked past it. He had taken 2 steps beyond it before he stopped and went back, because he had a specific memory of losing his own wallet 6 years ago and the particular helpless frustration of that experience. And because he was the kind of person who, when the competing instincts of self-interest and conscience went head to head, needed only the memory of a prior inconvenience to make the decision that he would not have been able to defend abandoning. He picked it up. There was cash inside. He did not count it, but it was substantial, a layered stack of bills that suggested the owner was either wealthy or had recently been to an ATM in a generous mood. There were credit cards, a driver's license, and a business card that was heavier than standard business cards, printed on material that communicated expense in the way that certain objects communicate expense. Not through ostentation, but through the specific quality of the thing itself. The name on the license and the business card was the same. Elliot Marsh. He did not know that name. He did not know that name the way that most people in the city did not know that name, which was because Elliot Marsh conducted his professional life with a discretion that was somewhat unusual for a man who had built a commercial real estate development company worth approximately $3.4 billion over 30 years. He did not appear on lists. He did not give interviews. He had a small profile in a regional business publication from 11 years ago that described him as methodical and private, and that was essentially the extent of his public presence. Daniel looked at the business card. He looked at the cash. He looked at his watch. He was already late. He stood on the wet sidewalk for a moment with the wallet in his hand and thought about Nora at the kitchen table that morning, negotiating the cereal situation with the methodical patience of someone who had not yet learned that some negotiations were worth less energy than they cost. He thought about the way she watched him sometimes when she thought he was not looking, not seeking approval, but building a model of how a person moved through the world, collecting data, running comparisons, arriving at conclusions he would not know about until they surfaced years later in the decisions she made. He thought that the decisions she watched him make on ordinary mornings when nothing was at stake were probably more formative than the ones he made when he was paying attention to being observed. He put the wallet in his jacket pocket, continued to work, processed 14 loan applications through the first half of the day, ate a sandwich at his desk, and during his lunch break called the number on the business card. A woman answered. She identified herself as Mr. Marsh's executive assistant. Her voice had the particular quality of someone who had spent years filtering the world on behalf of another person and had developed an efficient and impenetrable professional manner as a result. Daniel said he had found a wallet belonging to Elliot Marsh and that he was calling to return it. There was a brief pause. The assistant said she would need to verify a few details. She asked him to describe the contents. He did. She put him on hold for 90 seconds. When she came back, her manner had shifted in a way that was subtle but detectable, a slight loosening of the professional efficiency, as if a classification had changed. She said Mr. Marsh was unavailable, but that she could arrange for a courier to collect the wallet at Daniel's convenience. Daniel said that worked fine. He gave her his office address. He said there was no rush. The assistant said she appreciated that, but that Mr. Marsh would want this handled today. The courier arrived at 2:45. He was professional and efficient, and he carried a sealed envelope which he said Mr. Marsh had asked to be given to the person returning the wallet. Daniel opened it after the courier left. Inside was a handwritten note on plain white paper and $500 in cash. The note said, "Thank you for your honesty. It is rarer than it should be. E.M." Daniel looked at the note for a moment. He looked at the $500. He put the note in his desk drawer. He put the $500 in the envelope and sealed it back up and wrote his return address on the outside. He mailed it back the next morning on his way to drop Nora at school. Nora had asked him what the envelope was. He had said he was returning something that belonged to someone else. She had said what was it? He had said money. She had looked at the envelope and then at him with the expression she produced when she was deciding whether the information she had been given was complete. She had said whose money? He had said a man who had lost his wallet. She had said was the man nice? He had said he did not know yet. She had thought about this for the remaining 2 blocks to school, and then, when he hugged her goodbye at the gate, she had said she thought it was good that he was giving it back. She had said it in the tone she used for things she had decided were settled. He had said he thought so too. The note he kept. He was not sure why. It was simply the kind of thing that felt wrong to throw away. What happened next is where the story becomes something other than a straightforward account of a small good deed. 3 days after the courier exchange, Daniel's phone rang from an unknown number during the 45 minutes between dropping Nora at school and arriving at the office. It was Elliot Marsh, not his assistant, not a representative. Elliot Marsh himself calling from a private number in a voice that was measured and direct and that contained underneath its professional composure something that Daniel would later try to describe to his sister and find himself unable to characterize precisely, except to say that it sounded like a man who was not accustomed to being surprised and had recently been surprised. He said he understood Daniel had returned the money as well. Daniel said he had. There was a pause. Not the pause of someone processing information, but the pause of someone choosing how to respond to something that had already been processed. Elliot said he wanted to ask Daniel a question and that Daniel was under no obligation to answer it. Daniel said go ahead. Elliot said the wallet had contained $4,200 in cash. He said in his experience. And his experience was extensive on the subject of human behavior under conditions of anonymous opportunity. Virtually no one returned cash found in a wallet without taking some portion of it. He said Daniel had returned the money and then returned the reward. He wanted to know why. Daniel thought about this for a moment. He was standing on the sidewalk outside a coffee shop, the morning foot traffic moving around him. A cup of coffee he had not yet opened in his hand. He said he was not sure he could give a satisfying answer because the honest answer was pretty simple. He said he had a 7-year-old daughter who watched how he moved through the world and made decisions accordingly, and that the kind of man he wanted her to observe her father being was not complicated to describe. He said the money was not his. He said returning it completely felt like the minimum version of the right thing, not something that deserved a reward. Elliot was quiet for a moment. He said he had a meeting he needed to get to. He said he appreciated Daniel's time. He hung up. Daniel stood on the sidewalk for a moment with his coffee. He thought about the conversation he had just had, specifically about the answer he had given, which had been the actual answer rather than the prepared version, and whether those two things being the same was something he should take note of or simply accept as the output of a question he had not had time to overthink. He decided it was the second thing. He opened his coffee and drank it on the sidewalk for another minute, then went to work and processed 14 loan applications, 2 of which he flagged with personal notes to the review committee recommending secondary review of circumstances the automated scoring system was not equipped to evaluate with appropriate nuance. He had been writing those notes for 3 years. The committee had acted on 11 of them. He was keeping count. He did not know yet that he was also building a record of exactly the kind of thinking the letter on his kitchen table in 6 days would be looking for. He thought that was probably the end of it, and he went to work. It was not the end of it. 2 days later, which was the 7th day since he had found the wallet, Daniel received a certified letter at his home address. He signed for it at the door before Nora's bedtime, holding her with one arm while he took the envelope with the other, because she had heard the knock and come running from the hallway in her pajamas with the alertness of a child who treated all unexpected events as potentially interesting. Nora had looked at the envelope and asked if it was important. He had said he did not know yet. She had said it looked important. She pointed at the certified mail sticker and said her teacher had told them that certified mail meant someone really wanted to make sure you got the letter. He had said that was accurate. She had asked if it was good news or bad news. He had said he genuinely did not know. She had accepted this and gone back to her book. And he had stood in the entrance with the envelope in his hand, and the quiet apartment around him, and the particular stillness of a life that was about to be offered something it had not been looking for. And he did not open it until she was asleep. Nora had heard the knock and come running from the hallway in her pajamas with the alertness of a child who treated all unexpected events as potentially interesting. She had looked at the envelope with the certified mail sticker and said her teacher had told them that certified mail meant someone really wanted to make sure you got the letter. He had said that was accurate. She had asked if it was good news or bad news. He had said he genuinely did not know. She had studied his face for a moment and then accepted this as the complete available information and gone back to her book. And he had stood in the entrance holding the envelope in the quiet apartment, the laminated schedule visible on the refrigerator behind him. Nora's swim lesson circled in green for tomorrow. Everything ordinary and unchanged and about to be different. Inside was a letter from Elliot Marsh's legal office. It was 3 pages, and it was precise in the way that legal documents are precise when they have been written by people who understand that the difference between a word and a slightly different word can cost a great deal of time and money to resolve. Daniel read it once and understood most of it, and then read it again and understood all of it. Elliot Marsh had a development project. It was a mixed-use residential and commercial complex on the eastern waterfront, a 7-year project that Marsh Development had been building toward for the better part of a decade. The project had a community development component, a requirement attached to the zoning approval. And that component involved the creation of a not-for-profit financial services center that would provide low-cost lending, financial literacy programming, and credit counseling to residents of the surrounding neighborhoods, which were historically underserved by conventional banking institutions. The letter said that Marsh Development was seeking a director for this center. The letter said that the position required someone with documented expertise in loan processing and community lending, genuine commitment to financial access as a principle rather than a compliance obligation, and the specific quality of character that the position's oversight responsibilities required. The letter said that Elliot Marsh believed he had recently met someone who possessed all 3. It was not a job offer. It was an invitation to a conversation. Daniel sat at his kitchen table with the letter for a long time. He thought about 14 loan applications processed per day, and a car with brake pads that needed replacing, and a daughter with opinions about cereal, and a desk drawer that now contained a handwritten note from a man he had never met who had described honesty as rarer than it should be. He thought about the 14 blocks he walked to work every morning, and the things he thought about on those walks, which were often about the families who came through the credit union with applications that he processed correctly and efficiently, and that were sometimes declined by criteria he had not set and could not change, and that left people in the same place they had started, except now with the additional weight of a formal rejection. He thought about what it would mean to build something designed specifically not to do that. He called the number on the letter the next morning after dropping Nora at school. The assistant answered. Daniel said he would like to accept the invitation to a conversation. The assistant said she would put him through. The night before the meeting, Daniel told Nora over dinner that he was going to talk to someone about a different job. She had asked what kind of different. He had said it was a job where he would help people get loans who had trouble getting them the regular way. She had said, was that what he did now? He had said it was part of what he did now, but that this would be the whole job, and that it would involve building something new rather than working inside something that already existed. She had asked if building something new was harder. He had said usually yes. She had asked if he wanted to do it anyway. He had thought about this with the seriousness it deserved and said yes. She had nodded and gone back to her dinner and asked if there was more pasta. There was more pasta. The night before the meeting, Daniel told Nora over dinner that he was going to talk to someone about a different job. She asked what kind of different. He said it was a job where he would help people get loans who had trouble getting them the regular way. She said, was that what he did now? He said it was part of what he did now, but that this would be the whole job, and that it would involve building something new rather than working inside something that already existed. She asked if building something new was harder. He said usually yes. She asked if he wanted to do it anyway. He thought about this for a moment with the seriousness it deserved. He said yes. She nodded and went back to her dinner and asked if there was more pasta. There was more pasta. She ate it and then said without looking up that she hoped the man was nice. He said he thought he probably was. She said good, and that was the end of her opinion on the matter, which was how Nora handled most things. She asked the relevant question, received the relevant answer, delivered her verdict, and moved on. It was a quality he had always admired in her. The meeting took place 3 days later in a conference room in the Marsh Development offices, a space that was functional and unadorned in the specific way of offices belonging to people who do not need their surroundings to communicate their status. Elliot Marsh was 67 years old, shorter than Daniel had imagined, with close-cropped white hair and the unhurried posture of a man who had long ago stopped measuring time by other people's expectations of urgency. He shook Daniel's hand and looked at him directly. He said he had one question before they got into the details of the position. Daniel said, "Go ahead." Elliot said he wanted to know what Daniel would do differently with a lending institution than what was currently being done. Not the policy version of the answer, but the actual version. Daniel said the actual version was that most lending institutions were structured to avoid risk, which was rational from a business perspective, but which meant they systematically declined people who were not poor risks, but simply unconventional ones. People who were self-employed, people with gaps in their employment history for reasons that had nothing to do with their reliability. People who were rebuilding after circumstances that their credit scores recorded but did not explain. He said the work he wanted to do was to build the capacity to distinguish between those two categories, which required time and judgment and a willingness to sit with complexity that most institutions designed their processes specifically to avoid. Elliot looked at him for a moment. He said that was the actual version. Daniel said he had been thinking about it for a while. Elliot said he could tell. They talked for 2 hours. Elliot asked specific questions and received specific answers, and when an answer led somewhere more interesting, he followed it without the performance of someone managing an interview. He had, Daniel came to understand during the first 40 minutes, already made a decision. The conversation was not evaluative. It was constructive. At one point, Elliot said, without preamble, that the thing that had interested him most about Daniel returning the money and then returning the reward was not the honesty itself. It was the reasoning. He said he had encountered many honest people over 67 years. He had encountered significantly fewer who could explain why they were honest in a way that was not circular. Daniel had said he was not sure he had explained it that well. Elliot had said he had explained it better than he thought. At the end, Elliot said he would be in touch through his legal team with a formal proposal. He said the project broke ground in 14 months and he needed the center operational within 6 months of opening. He said it was not a small undertaking. Daniel said he understood that. Elliot said he thought he probably did. They shook hands. Daniel walked out of the building onto the street and stood for a moment in the November afternoon. The city moved around him the way cities move, continuous and indifferent and full of the uncountable small decisions that constitute ordinary days. Decisions about whether to stop or keep walking, whether to pick something up or step around it, whether the right thing and the convenient thing were the same thing or not, and what a person did in the space between them. He had a 7-year-old daughter at home who was going to need cereal in the morning, and he had not yet solved the cereal situation, and tomorrow was swim lesson day, which was green on the laminated schedule, and he needed to remember the extra towel. He thought about Nora watching him from the kitchen table on mornings when she thought he wasn't paying attention, building her model of how a person was supposed to move through the world. He thought the version of himself he was trying to be, for her benefit and his own, was the version that recognized when something was being offered and understood what it was actually offering. Not money or resolution or reward for a good deed. The chance to do the work he had been preparing for without knowing he was preparing for it. He thought that was enough to say yes to. He started walking. He had a 7-year-old daughter at home who was going to need cereal in the morning, both hands in his pockets. The long way home because he needed to think and the walking helped, and some things were worth taking the extra time to get right. The city moved around him the way it always had, continuous and indifferent and full of the uncountable small decisions of ordinary people on ordinary days, each one invisible to everyone except the person making it. He had made one of those decisions on a wet sidewalk 11 days ago, and it had led here, which was a fact he found neither miraculous nor inexplicable. It was simply what happened when you did the right thing, not for what it would bring, but because not doing it was not a version of yourself you were willing to be. He walked, both hands in his pockets, the way he always went home, with full attention and nothing left to second guess, and Nora at the end of it, and the serial situation still unsolved, and tomorrow already arranged on the laminated schedule in its proper color, and all of it. Every ordinary, demanding, irreplaceable piece of it, exactly where it was supposed to be. He kept walking.